Hi folks, thought I'd make a quick video today on a topic we've already kind of covered once, and that's replacing NOx sensors. This time we'll take a look at the other end of the system and replace an outlet NOx sensor. It's a very similar procedure to replacing an inlet NOx sensor, which we've already covered, so I won't go too in depth with the procedure here. It's mostly just a change in mounting positions. I'd still recommend checking out the other video too though, because there may be things mentioned in that one that could help you out. Once again, the example I'm working on here is an EPA 10 Detroit diesel 1-box setup. These sensors are very similar, almost identical across brands. The only real difference you're going to find is where they're mounted. In this case, the electronic body of the sensor is mounted inside the box on top of the 1-box, towards the rear of the vehicle. A single screw holds the lid of the box on. Once inside, you just got to cut away any zip ties or things like that might be in your way. Remove 2 screws that hold the sensor to the box, and unplug the electrical connector by pulling up on the yellow tab here. Most of these sensors are all 4-wire sensors. One of the things that will differ between OEMs is the electrical connector itself. Here we see that this is one of the older style sensors. It still has the metal backing on it, and you can see in that upper corner that it's starting to corrode. Some of them have been known to corrode right through the sensor. Once you have the body of the sensor removed, you can move on to removing the sensor itself out of the exhaust. In the case of a Detroit 1-box, the sensor is in the bottom, towards the back, on the inboard side of the 1-box. In this case, it sits very close to the SCR outlet temperature sensor, so while working around it, you got to be very careful not to damage that sensor. Even a slight bend to it could make it read wrong. Here you can see that the sensor screws into the outlet side of the SCR chamber, but the outer shell of the 1-box sort of covers over it. In this case, the hole through the outer shell lines up perfectly with the sensor, and it's easy to get a socket in there. But some of them are manufactured a little bit off, and that hole doesn't quite line up perfectly over the sensor. I've had some that you actually had to take a die grinder and cut away some of that outer shell just so you could get at the hex head of the sensor. Now, to get the sensor out without damaging it, you'll have to use one of these open-ended sockets that can fit over the body of the sensor and allow the wiring to pass through while you spin it out. The example I'm using here isn't very good because this style of socket is kind of terrible, but it was the one I had on hand, so I gave it a shot. Now these sensors can really get seized up in there, and they don't want to let go. Sockets like this have a tendency to spread and slip. They lose their grip on the sensor and they start to round corners off on them. If it seems like you're going to risk damaging the sensor and not being able to get it out, or if you just know there's no warranty on this truck and there's no possible way you're going to get any money back for this sensor, a good way that I like to do it is to just cut it. In a tight spot like this, a 90-degree die grinder or a good old pair of bolt cutters is a great way to do it. Here you see the top portion of the sensor cut away. Once the wires are clipped off and the top portion of the sensor is trimmed down some, a regular deep wall socket will fit on it. This is a 22mm, but a 7/8 also fits. Like I mentioned in my other video about the inlet NOx sensors, I've had better luck getting these out while they're cold. Usually when things seize up like this, your natural reaction is to heat them up to get them out. But I've found that most of the time when they're hot, if they do spin out for you, they often damage the threads. Luckily, the threads on the sensor itself tend to be a little weaker than the threads in the exhaust itself. So when there is damage done, it seems to be mostly to the sensor. The threads on this one are in pretty good shape. I still always recommend tapping out the hole though, even if it doesn't seem like the threads are damaged at all. Any dirt or debris that is left in there could mess up the new sensor when it goes in. An M20 by 1.5 tap will clean it out. Then you're ready to install your new sensor. Detroit Diesel's new sensors come with a coating over the threads, and every manual I've seen so far all recommend that you don't add anything to it. Don't add any anti-seize compound or anything like that. It can risk getting inside the exhaust or on the sensor itself and probably skew its readings a little bit. After you've cleaned the threads out with a tap, the sensor just threads in by hand. Then it's just a matter of mounting the other end of the sensor back in place. Here we see a newer style sensor. There's a lot more plastic involved with the construction of this one, including a plastic backing where it sits up against the metal surface that it mounts to. This stops the corrosion issue. Just mount it back up in its original location and it'll connect all your electrical connections. And again, if you're dealing with one of these Detroits where all these sensors are kind of stuffed into this box, the main thing I can tell you is to tie up your wiring very neatly. Don't let it rub against anything, and try not to even let it rub against itself, because I've seen a lot of problems with chafed wiring in here. Quite often, creative zip tying really cuts down on electrical problems. So that just about does it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. If you think this video helped you out at all, maybe give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more. And as always, thanks for watching.